something that was an effect in real life or something that they thought about was going on, whether it be consumerism or whatnot, and they make a movie based off of that. Look at a movie like The Stuff, of course, Dawn of the Dead does it, and Romero's movies are always about, his Living Dead films have always to me been about humanity and how, unfortunately, it's almost like we will be our own destruction, not the zombies. And that we, as a civilization, there's a Papa Roach song called Blood Brothers. It's in our nature to destroy ourselves. It's in our nature to kill ourselves. It's a great song. I'm not a huge Papa Roach fan, but that song, I remember it from like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. It's a great song. I do like Papa Roach. They had some great albums back in the day. That was something that sounded pretty good to me. Now, Romero's history when it came to Living Dead in the later years, in essence, the 2000s. It was interesting. Land of the Dead was not an experience that he enjoyed. It was a big budget film. It was a big studio film, and there were a lot of hands in the pie in America. So people kind of trash Diary and Survival, but whether you like it or not, those films were more in the vein of what Romero, that's his way of doing things, like control, complete control. So that's one of the things that's been something I've been concerned about with Twilight of the Dead, but we do have some new stuff we can talk about. Let's get into that, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on this whole thing. So here, let's go to this. Okay, guys, George Romero's Twilight of the Dead resurrected with new star and director. I remember a few years ago there was announcements that things were moving in a direction, and then a couple years goes by, and then I don't hear anything, and I just figure, okay, it's falling to the wayside. We have a pretty big movie star getting involved with this. All right, guys, George Romero's Twilight of the Dead resurrected with new star and director. In the second piece of Kate Beckinsale-related horror news, Deadline reports that the Underworld star is set to lead Twilight of the Dead, the final chapter of George Romero's iconic zombie saga. As Deadline reminds, Romero wrote a treatment for Twilight of the Dead before he passed, considering it the conclusion of his Dead series, comprised of 6 movies and various spin-offs and remakes, starting in '68 with Night of the Living Dead and its latest being 2009 Survival of the Dead. Previously Resident Evil, which I might do a review of that. I've been thinking about doing a review of Survival of the Dead, just to kind of like do like a how bad was it, or how is it underrated at this point, or what people's thoughts are. And its latest being 2009 Survival of the Dead. Previously Resident star Mia was set to lead Twilight Dead with Session 9's Brad Anderson in the director's chair. Taking over the direction for the iteration of Twilight of the Dead are Doran and Yoav Paz, better known as the Paz brothers, whose genre credits include The Golem and Plan A, which admittedly I have not seen either one of those. Here's what they have to say about the new project. Stepping into Romero's world is the ultimate privilege for any genre filmmaker. This is more than a continuation. It's a responsibility. We are committed to honoring his voice while delivering a visceral, terrifying, impactful experience for today's audiences that resonates beyond the screen. Per Deadline, Magenta Studios, who did Deepwater Protector, Strange Darling, has secured North American rights to Twilight of the Dead and is due to distribute the film in theaters across U.S. and Canada, with executive producers Jeffrey Giles and Michael Lurie launching the project at the Cannes market later this week. Bob Yari, Magenta Light CEO, had the following to say on the pick. George Romero is one of the most successful and influential creatives in the horror genre and space, and his final film deserves to be experienced on the big screen, which I do agree with that. We're proud to partner with his estate and the filmmakers to bring Twilight of the Dead to audiences. As a standout addition to Magenta Light Studios' growing film catalog, we are committed to delivering a thrilling theatrical experience for fans who have been waiting for this conclusion. Look out for more on Twilight as the Dead as we get it. If they were winging it and they didn't have a lot of what Romero wanted to do with this, I would be pretty vehemently against it. But the reality is they do have a blueprint. They do have an outline from George. One thing I haven't seen yet, and that I think could be a concern, is we need to involve as many of George's movie family as possible. Whether it makes sense or not, I think it'd be nice to have a cameo from a Ken Faree. I think having a Ken Faree would be nice in there. Nicotero and Tom Savini need to be involved in this film. I really think they need to have a hand in this film. I think it needs to have DNA from George's previous movies in here as much as possible. I understand not having like a Nicotero direct or a Savini direct this. I know Tom really doesn't even want to direct anymore. And I know that these guys are older. I mean, not Nicotero, not that much, but I know Tom Savini's, he's getting up there. I think he's close to 80. But with that being said, I really think it would be nice to have members of the family be involved in this. People that George trusted, people that George relied on to make these films. Don't look as this huge multi-million-dollar big project, because that's never the way George operated with his Living Dead films. He always did things smaller budgets for control, and it's all about the best performances he can get, the best makeup artists he can get, and the best story. That's always the way he operated. Obviously, with the exception of Land, that was a bigger budget film, which I like. I think it ages well. I have concerns, but I feel like in the grand sense, it seems like things are heading in a pretty good direction. I really don't know if I should be overly excited or very, very cautious about it at this point. I'm kind of both. You know, I think it's cool to see George's vision be realized. But at the same time, with him not being here, I almost wonder if it's better to leave it alone and let the film rest with George. I just don't know. But feedback in film, I don't think I really have that much concern with that. Obviously, I don't want this to feel like an underworld film. I'm not saying just because she did those movies, it's automatically going to feel that way. But I mean, naturally, my head kind of went there for a second. So it's one of those things, guys. I really don't know how to feel yet. I think it's a situation where it's going to happen. So we may as well hope for the best and hope that the people that are involved truly do have George's best in mind with this, and it doesn't get away from that. So that's it for now, guys. I want to know what you guys are thinking about this. Mixed emotions. I'm very, very anxious about it. At the same time, to see George's final vision come to life is something that is, at the end of the day, still exciting. I still think his Resident Evil film should be made, but that's just me. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this whole thing down below. Do you think they should continue on? Do you think this should have stayed in bed with Romero and not ever happen? Or you'll judge it when you see it. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you all very, very soon. Let's cover one of our 10 pro tips for working with cursor agents. The fourth agent pro tip is that you can pass images to the agent. So we have our list of top artists, but maybe we want it to look more like the Spotify Wrapped. So let's copy this image. We can go. Rokossovsky ordered the first Guards tank corps to advance through the same breach.
Receiving you.
Facing the threat of encirclement, General Jordan ordered the 20th Panzer to withdraw and head south. The retreat was slow due to the poor condition of the roads and the multitude of refugees. Soon, the vanguard of the 20th Panzer clashed with Soviet forces south of Battletech. Despite destroying more than 60 enemy armored vehicles, the Germans also suffered significant losses and failed to halt the Soviet advance. Meanwhile, in the north, the 1st Guards Tank Corps was about to encircle the German troops on the eastern bank of the Berezina. Fearing Hitler's reaction, Marshal Busch forbade any retreat as long as there was still a chance to defeat the Soviets. On June 26th, the 20th Panzer withdrew to the outskirts of Bobruisk under pressure from the 1st Guards Tank Corps from the south and the 9th Tank Corps from the east. The next day, the 9th Corps captured the main Berezina crossings, blocking the German retreat and trapping several infantry divisions. Rokossovsky took advantage of the German collapse by sending the 1st Mechanized Corps westward to prevent any counterattack from Baranovici. Facing the critical situation, Busch and General Jordan flew to Germany to try to convince Hitler and the Haute Liege to abandon the strategy of defending at all costs. Hitler's reaction was immediate. Furious, he dismissed Jordan on June 27th, and the next day replaced Busch, appointing Marshal Montgomery. Instead of reconsidering his stance, he reaffirmed the order to resist at all costs, condemning thousands of soldiers to imminent encirclement. Meanwhile, in Bobruisk, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The 1st Belarusian front had trapped more than 40,000 soldiers in an area of barely 25 kilometers in diameter east of the city. Several breakout attempts were made, but Soviet artillery contained them with intense fire.
Shortly after, the Soviet Air Force joined the attack, wreaking havoc among the encircled troops. According to Soviet sources, 10,000 Germans were killed and 6,000 were captured, while the survivors managed to retreat toward Bobruisk, only to become surrounded again within the city a few hours later. In a desperate attempt, Hitler ordered the 12th Panzer Division to be sent from north, but with only 44 Panzer III and 4 tanks, it could not arrive in time. On June 27th, Soviet infantry launched the assault on the city in a scenario similar to Vitebsk. The OKH allowed a breakout attempt on the condition that at least one division remained in Bobruisk. At 2300 hours on June 28th, the German infantry, supported by the few remaining tanks of the 20th Panzer, launched a desperate offensive. After intense fighting, a vulnerable point in the encirclement was identified northeast of the city, and waves of German soldiers passed through it in the darkness. However, at dawn, they were attacked by Soviet infantry before reaching the positions of the 12th Panzer, which was 20 kilometers away. Ultimately, about 15,000 soldiers managed to escape, though disarmed and completely demoralized. On June 29th, after 2 days of fierce combat, Bobruisk fell into Soviet hands. In less than a week, the First Belarusian Front had destroyed or captured 366 armored vehicles and 2,664 artillery pieces. German casualties amounted to 50,000 men, while another 20,000 were taken prisoner. With the total destruction of the Ninth Army, Rokossovsky gave the order to advance toward Minsk. His objective was, together with the Third Belarusian Front, to encircle the German Fourth Army and the scattered remnants of the Ninth that were still managing to retreat. Minsk in flames, the last German stronghold in Belarus. By the end of June, both the OKH and Hitler himself finally understood that the offensive in Belarus was not merely a diversionary attack, but a large-scale operation. However, the reinforcements available to Army Group Center were scarce, so Minsk would have to be defended with the units already on the ground. Hitler's order to resist at all costs had turned the German forces between Borisov and Minsk into a disorganized and demoralized group. Nevertheless, it would be these remnants tasked with halting the advance of the two Soviet fronts heading toward the city. Given the gravity of the situation, the only viable strategy was to delay the Soviet advance as long as possible while evacuating. The Soviet forces attacked Minsk from 3 directions. The fierce resistance of the 5th Panzer on the Moscow-Minsk highway forced the 29th Tank Corps to shift northward, advancing through the forests with little opposition, though at a slower pace. Meanwhile, the rest of the 5th Tank Army continued its offensive along the highway with support from the 11th Guards Army. In the south, the 2nd Guards Tank Corps managed to cross the allowing it to advance rapidly toward Minsk. Between July 1st and 2nd, the 5th Panzer and the Tigers of the 505 Heavy Battalion engaged in intense combat against the 5th Guards Tank Army. The Germans were defending the only railway line that allowed the evacuation of the city and refused to yield ground. According to their reports, they managed to destroy 295 Soviet armored vehicles, 125 of them knocked out by the Tigers of the 505th. However, this resistance came at a cost. By July 8th, the 5th Panzer had only 18 operational tanks left, while all the Tigers of the 505 had been destroyed or were out of service. Following his usual pattern, Hitler declared Minsk a fortress city. However, only 1,800 soldiers were initially in the city, with another 12,000 arriving later. For the first time, Hitler relented and allowed the evacuation on July 2nd. In the early hours of July 3rd, the Soviet 2nd Tank Corps reached the southern sector of Minsk. Shortly afterward, the 4th Armored Brigade loaded as many infantrymen as possible onto its tanks and broke through the weakened German defenses. Hours later, the 1st Guards Tank Corps of the 1st Belarusian Front joined the attack from the southeast. In the following days, 2 more Soviet armies joined the offensive. With the fall of Minsk, the first major objective of Operation Bagration had been achieved. The encirclement of Minsk trapped a large number of German soldiers east of the city, as many divisions were still crossing the Berezina when the isolation was completed. Soviet infantry immediately began operations to eliminate these pockets of resistance. During the first days of July, German escape attempts were relatively organized, allowing several units to break through Soviet lines and retreat westward in some order. However, as the days passed, the lack of supplies and ammunition weakened their fighting capacity, gradually reducing the chances of escape. By July 9th, the last German stronghold of resistance had been annihilated, although Soviet infantry continued to comb the region for stragglers for weeks. According to estimates, of the 15,000 men circled east of Minsk, only about 1,000 managed to escape. The speed of the Soviet advance also overtook numerous units of the 9th Army and the 3rd Panzer Army, although they managed to retreat northward. By then, Army Group Center had been practically annihilated. 17 divisions were completely destroyed, and German casualties reached 300,000 men, half of whom were captured. The disappearance of a GC represented Germany's worst military defeat of the entire Second World War.
Today's scams are tricky, but identifying them is Introducing Trent.
World War. In less than 2 weeks, the Red Army eliminated more divisions and inflicted more casualties on the enemy than the Germans had suffered in Stalingrad. This devastating breach in the defensive lines forced the German High Command to transfer reinforcements from army groups north and south, severely weakening both fronts. The collapse of Army Group Center left Germany without an effective barrier in Belarus. The gateway to the heart of the Reich was now completely open. Storm of Steel, the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive. The OKH was well aware that Army Group South, also known as North Ukraine, would be the next target of a Soviet offensive, although it did not know the exact date. Having sent part of its forces to reinforce Army Group Center, AGS was weakened, something the Soviets would not take long to exploit. Opposing them was one of the largest concentrations of the Red Army, the First Ukrainian Front under Marshal Konev, with more than 1 million soldiers, 1,600 tanks, 14,000 artillery pieces and mortars, and 2,800 aircraft. Additionally, it would be supported by Rokossovsky's First Belarusian Front, positioned further north. Under the command of General Harper, Army Group South had 5 panzer divisions, 1 motorized division, and 34 infantry divisions. Weeks earlier, it would have been in a position to face Konev's forces on equal terms, but after the transfer of troops northwards, its strength had been reduced to 900,000 soldiers, 900 tanks, 9,000 artillery pieces, and 700 aircraft. However, its defenses were deep and fortified, reaching up to 30 kilometers in some sectors. The magnitude of the Soviet buildup made it impossible to conceal the target of the offensive, which was clearly aimed at Lvov. Aware of the Soviet tactic of massive artillery barrages, the German command began to withdraw its artillery to rear positions to minimize losses. Konev detected the movement and decided to act first. Without waiting for the initial bombardment, he launched his infantry against the German lines. The defenders, this time with artillery and Luftwaffe support, put up fierce resistance. However, the overwhelming Soviet superiority eventually prevailed. After 2 days of intense fighting, the Red Army encircled the city of Brody, while the 13th Army opened a breach in the front, allowing mechanized forces to advance northward. The Germans maintained strong resistance east of Lvov, prompting General Harper to resort to his strategic reserve. On July 14th and 15th, he sent the 1st and 8th Panzer Divisions to try to halt the Soviet offensive. Meanwhile, Konev, who had orders not to deploy his tanks until the infantry had broken through the enemy defenses, realized that German resistance would not collapse without armored support. On July 16th, he ordered the 3rd Guards Tank Army to advance through a narrow corridor at Koltov, followed the next day by the 4th Tank Army. On the 17th, the Soviet vanguard reached Lvov and engaged the German panzers. The situation worsened for the Wehrmacht on July 18th, when Rokossovsky joined his offensive with Konev, launching an attack toward Kovel. After 2 days of heavy fighting, the German defensive line was overcome, and Rokossovsky set course for Lublin, penetrating Polish territory. That same day, the failed assassination attempt against Hitler in East Prussia, combined with constant defeats in France and on the Eastern Front, shattered the morale of German troops, who were beginning to see the war as a lost cause. In Lvov, the Soviet offensive advanced more slowly than expected. The initial armored assault failed due to the swampy terrain surrounding the city, allowing Harper to reinforce the defense with infantry units. Connor, for his part, avoided committing more tanks to such a difficult advance. Each day of resistance in Lvov represented valuable time gained for the Germans, who rushed to reinforce their new defensive line along the San River. However, on July 22nd, the city of Brody fell into Soviet hands. With 30,000 German soldiers captured and several Soviet divisions freed, pressure on Lvov increased significantly. With reinforcements arriving on the first Belarusian front, Konev decided not to wait any longer, and on July 24th launched the assault on the city. Instead of holding out to the end, the German garrison ignored orders to stand firm and chose to evacuate the city on the night of the 26th, retreating toward the Carpathians. At dawn the next day, Lvov fell into Soviet hands. That same July 27th, the 3rd Guards Tank Army seized the city of Przemysl in a swift assault. On July 27, 1944, the collapse of the defensive system in Galicia became inevitable when the First Ukrainian Front took Lvov and Przemysl, previously evacuated by Axis forces. These advances allowed the 3rd Guards Tank Army to cross the Vistula River for the first time within hours, establishing a bridgehead near Magnesu that quickly expanded to 5 kilometers wide and 3 deep. In an attempt to retake the western bank, the 4th Panzer Army launched multiple counterattacks, but the 1st Ukrainian Front responded by deploying the 13th Army and a large concentration of artillery. Not only did they repel the German assaults, but they expanded the bridgehead to 20 kilometers, reaching just 65 kilometers from Warsaw. The advance in eastern Poland began to slow by late July 1944. The 2nd Belarusian Front encountered difficulties in the Augusta Forest, where remnants of the German 4th Army offered fierce resistance. In Lipsk, they managed to temporarily retake the city before being expelled again by the Soviets, and even destroyed 180 enemy armored vehicles in another engagement. However, the German defense could barely hold. Once Soviet troops dismantled the fortifications of the 50th Infantry Division at Nemansk, the fall of Białystok was imminent. On July 27th, Soviet armored forces entered the city.
United Nations.
Consolidating their control over the region. By late July 1944, the Red Army launched its final offensive in southern Latvia, with the 2nd Baltic Front overcoming the defenses of the Panther Line, the first captured the city and compounds. During the operation, a group of Tiger tanks ambushed Soviet forces in Krivani, destroying 23 enemy armored vehicles, including 6 IS-2 Stalin tanks and 17 T-34s, as well as 6 anti-tank guns, without suffering any losses. A few days later, mechanized units of the 3rd Belarusian Front managed to encircle and capture several German columns, advancing rapidly. On July 28th, they took the crucial railway junction of Sioliai, and the next day reached the fishing village of Klapkalis on the Baltic Sea coast, completely separating Army Group North from Army Group Center. Axis counterattacks proved useless. Between July 30th and 31st, Soviet forces widened the corridor by capturing Vilza, Bauska, Joniskis, and Jelgava, as well as the port of Tukums in the Gulf of Riga. Unable to reverse the situation, and after the occupation of about 900 localities in a 230-kilometer advance, on August 1st, the German command ordered the evacuation of the last 10,000 soldiers from northeastern Lithuania. By the end of the day, the city of Kaunas had fallen into Red Army hands. On August 1st, 1944, the 1st Belarusian Front under Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky launched an additional offensive as part of Operation Bagration, driven by a direct order from Joseph Stalin. Its objective was to reach Warsaw in parallel with the Armia Krajowa uprising. The advance began with General Vasily Chukov's 8th Guards Army, which crossed the Vistula in 83 UKW amphibious vehicles, and General Alexei Radzievsky's Second Tank Army, which deployed 540 tanks, including 313 T-34s, 24 IS-2 Stalins, 93 Shermans, and several Su-85, Su-76, and Su-57 tank destroyers. After crossing the river, Soviet forces captured Siedlce, destroying a German armored train, and then took Radzimin and the Zegza Bridge, positioning themselves just 12 kilometers from Warsaw. It seemed that the Red Army was about to reach the Polish capital when the Second Tank Army made a fatal mistake, advancing parallel to the Vistula between the Liviak and Chana rivers.
I got him.
Assembled an armored force to launch a counterattack. His battle group included the 3rd SS Panzer Division, Viking, the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, and the 4th and 19th Panzer Divisions, with a total of 279 tanks, including 114 Panthers, 109 Panzer Vals, as well as Panthers.
I feel like not enough Jews know about it. Right, it's much going to love right to drive. If you've been in an accident you didn't cause
Panzer Jaeger 4, Marder Thread, on August 2nd, 1944, the German armored force launched a surprise attack, first destroying the Soviet supply convoys and then systematically